Hello everyone and welcome. In this video we're going to be trying to answer the question, what is the best type of all-wheel drive system? And hopefully what you'll realize through watching this video is that the answer to that question is very complicated and there's a lot of different situations in which different methods of all-wheel drive systems will be beneficial. And so hopefully we can illustrate and learn about these different methods, primarily talking about differentials and see what may be beneficial depending on the circumstances for which you would need all-wheel drive. So for our first example, we're going to be looking at an all-wheel drive system using only open differentials. So here we have our vehicle, here's the front of the car. We've got our engine sending torque to a center differential, which is then splitting it between the front and rear differentials, and then those split the power between the two wheels on each axle. And so all three of these are going to be open differentials. And what that means is that the torque split is always going to be 50-50. So half the torque goes to the front, half the torque goes to the rear, and then half the torque goes to each tire. So in a scenario where you have different levels of grip, for example, here we have a tire and it's on an icy patch. Now the amount of grip that this tire has, the amount of force that it can apply as far as forward thrust is going to be equal to the frictional coefficient between the tire and the ice and this normal force. And because it's on ice, this frictional coefficient is very little, so the amount of force that that tire can push the car forward is also very little. So the amount of torque that each of these tires is getting is equal. So the same force that this is applying is basically the amount of torque that all these other wheels can apply. And so because of that, if the amount of torque here isn't enough to overcome the static friction of all these other different tires of the vehicle, then the force isn't going to be enough to accelerate the vehicle forward. Now here we have an example where the vehicle has one tire that's lifted off the ground. So here we've got 3 on the ground and 1 off the ground. And if you did nothing about it, you just had open differentials and that was your only solution to this problem, well, what happens is this tire is going to receive enough torque to spin that tire. And all the other tires are going to also get that same amount of torque, but it doesn't take much torque to spin a tire. And so it's going to be not very much torque at all. And so you're basically going to be limiting the entire system because, okay, this tire is going to get the same amount of torque that this tire gets, which isn't all that much. And then that same amount of torque that goes to these two rear axles is going to the front axles, which isn't very much. And so in that scenario, the car is probably going to have a very challenging time accelerating. Now, one way around this in vehicles which do use open differentials is that you can use the brakes. And so by applying the brake on this tire right here, what it can do is essentially increase the amount of force, the amount of torque that can go to that tire. And by increasing the amount of torque that can go to that tire and then is absorbed through braking, so you're limited by your brakes now rather than traction, you can thus increase the amount of torque going to all the other 4 wheels. So it's the same force going to all of them, or the same torque going to all of them, but because you're using the brakes here, you can increase that and then your vehicle can accelerate off. Now, of course, you're using brakes, so that's not necessarily the greatest thing to do. You're gonna have more brake wear, things like that. There are better solutions to do it, but it absolutely does work and it can help you in that scenario, and it's certainly better than not having it at all. Okay, next I want to move over to locked differentials being used in all 3 differentials. And so this is gonna require a prop, which clearly I don't use for its intended purpose very often, but my point is here, this can illustrate a locked differential very easily. And so what happens is you have torque coming in and it tries to rotate this axle. So here's your 2 tires. In a locked differential, they're locked together. The speed of the 2 tires will always be equal, but the torque split can be very different. And so the easiest way to think about that is if I have my hand here and I want to try and rotate this. So by rotating this, I'm sending all the torque to these 2 wheels and rotating those 2 wheels. Now, if one of these wheels is in the air and one of these wheels has something to grip on, it's on, asphalt or something like that, well then when I try and rotate this, I can't because I'm gripping it with this arm. So in your head, where is the force going? I'm trying to rotate this, but I can't. All of that force is in my left hand. None of it is going here. This isn't doing anything to resist the moment. And so as soon as I let go, then it can spin. So all of that force is going into my hand. And that's basically an easy way of thinking about how a locked differential works. Okay, so looking at these examples here, what we've got is our 3 locked differentials. And in the scenario before where we had an ice patch, okay, so we know our front 2 wheels have a lot of grip and our rear left wheel has plenty of grip, but our right tire doesn't have any grip. So you're gonna have more torque going to the front, less torque going to the rear, and the torque that does go to the rear, more of it's gonna be going to this left wheel, and then most of it is gonna be going to your 2 front wheels for acceleration. Now in the scenario like this, I'm going to make it even worse. So let's say you only have one wheel on the ground. There really aren't scenarios where this is going to be common. You're probably falling off a cliff or something at this point, which is unfortunate. But my point is, if you were to be in some situation where you needed acceleration and you had one wheel on the ground, then with locked differentials, basically what's happening here is this is the only thing resisting rotation. So if none of these wheels are moving because this is here, then this is the only place that you can apply the force from the engine. And so in doing that, you start to use torque and you accelerate the vehicle forward. Now, yes, once you do start rotating it, you are using some torque in order to rotate the wheels. They have an inertia and you have to rotate them. That requires a force. But essentially what you're doing is sending all of that force to the ground. And so even in this scenario where you only have one wheel on the ground, you can still accelerate, which is pretty cool. Now, the downside of doing something like this, because it sounds like, okay, it's great, you can send torque exactly where it's needed based on grip. The downside is when you go around a corner on a road, all of your wheels are rotating at different speeds because the radius about the corner of which they're rotating is different. So this wheel is going about one radius, this wheel is obviously going about a larger radius and a left-hand turn. And so they're going to rotate at different speeds. Well, as I mentioned, a lock differential will not allow for rotating at different speeds. This is why, trucks will have locking differentials so that when you're on the road, you can unlock it, have it act as an open differential, and then once you're off-road, have it act as a lock differential, because off-road wheel slip isn't important. It's not going to cause tire wear. It's not going to cause binding in your transmission or in your drivetrain like it could on a road. So in cornering situations on roads, having a system like this would be terrible. Now, let's move on to a limited slip differential, because this is kind of the compromise of these two right here. Basically, what you're doing is maximizing torque split based on available grip. And so what we've got here is your torque is being sent. You've got this icy patch. So in this scenario, we've got three wheels which are on the ground, one's in the air, and then one is on an icy patch. Okay, so we're accelerating. We've got two wheels on the ground in the back. So the most grip we have is on the rear axle, because this has no grip right here. So most of the torque is going to be sent to the back, and a little bit is going to be sent towards the front for this tire right here. Now, of the torque which is sent to the back, remember these are three limited slip differentials. For this example, I'm going to basically be explaining with clutch type, because otherwise you're going to have speed differentials with things like viscous differentials. And if you do have, concerns about how different types of limited slip differentials work, I've got all kinds of links in the video description of all these different various types of limited slip differentials and how they would work in these kind of scenarios. So your torque is mostly going to the back, and then mostly going to this tire, and then mostly going to this tire. These could have pretty even torque being sent to them. This will have a little bit, and then this will have the least amount, depending on the type of limited slip differential used. It could be basically nothing. So there's advantage here because a limited slip differential allows for slip. And so if you do have a clutch, that clutch pack can slip, and it allows for speed differentials when you're going around a corner. And so it's kind of the best of both worlds. It combines these two to make it so that it's a road-friendly application. Very good if you have a scenario like this where you've got three limited slip differentials. There's going to be very, very few situations where you're not going to have the grip you need. And as you can see illustrated here, you've got one in ice, one on the up in the air, and you still have plenty to accelerate with on these two tires. And so there are also differentials used in the center which do basically a torque split based on gearing. That's kind of separate, but it's also a type of limited slip differential if you do add in some sort of active component to that so that you can change it. For example, like Subaru does with the STI, or Mitsubishi, they have a center differential which basically is a limited slip electronically controlled, and that can help alter the torque split. Now, torque vectoring, the difference here between torque vectoring and limited slip differential, the biggest thing to keep in mind when comparing these two is that torque vectoring allows you, the designer, to choose where the torque goes rather than the system doing it based on grip. So the only reason this tire right here is getting more torque than this tire right here is because it has resistance to that. In this situation, you can tell where you want that torque to go. You can say, I want all of it to go to this one tire, or I want all of it to go to this one tire. And so here I've got 3 torque vectoring differentials. I don't think this is commonly done, and there's a very good reason for that. It's just super costly, super expensive, and you could certainly get away with an open differential in the center and still have plenty of grip. But basically what we've got going on here is, if this vehicle is going around a corner, you want to be able to send more torque to the outside wheel, and that way you can help induce yaw and you can help rotate that vehicle. And so you're basically improving the handling through the differential and through using a better torque split. Whereas in this scenario, you can't do that. You can't say, I want to send more to the outside wheel. You can only send more to the outside wheel if the outside wheel has more resistance, more traction than the wheel on the left side. And so this gives you complete control. And so in pretty much any situation, what you could do is say, you know, in this front differential, I want to send 100% of the torque to the right wheel. And you could do that. And you could do that with a center differential as well. But here's the thing. These things aren't invincible. These aren't like indestructible, completely bulletproof differentials where all of the torque could really truly be sent to one wheel. So let's say you were in a situation like this where you have these 3 torque vectoring differentials and only one wheel is on the ground. Well, what it's going to try its best to do is send all of that torque to this wheel. But you have to realize these are clutch packs that are being compressed. They're rerouting that through planetary gear sets to the desired wheel. And in doing that, you can have some clutch slip in certain scenarios. So if it can only clamp so hard, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so if you exceed that limit, the clutch pack is going to slip and you're still going to have some torque going to the other side. So even though they can, you know, in theory, have a distribution of 0 to 100, all of the torque going to one side, there's very few circumstances in which that would occur. And so you don't have to make this super robust system where the clamping force on the clutch pack is so stiff that it allows for you to do that. You may have a little bit of slip, and it may be more like a 90-10 or an 80-20 split. So just something to keep in mind. And the other thing, of course, to keep in mind is that you don't have to use the same differential, obviously, for all 3 differentials. You can mix it up. And so in doing that, you have different advantages, which, you know, based on the different systems as I've described here. So there's a lot of ways of going about it. It's not a very simple question to answer, what is the best all-wheel drive system? But hopefully by looking at this, you can kind of look at your own car, see what it uses, if it does have all-wheel drive, and see the benefits of those systems based on whatever circumstances the car is intended for. So thank you guys for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below.